Hey, this is Subpixel, and I'm just doing a test using NDI, and I wanted to find out whether I can use it actually between two laptops on the same local network. So here we have the master computer. This is outputting. What I'm actually using is I'm using advanced output to output to NDI at 1080p. And also I'm doing an HDMI output at 1080p that's going to, not directly to a monitor, but to a TV1T750 that's used in the spark diffuser. And then I'm blending that with the output from the second laptop and putting them into an output. So I've got half a screen each. The screen on the left is from the master, and the screen on the right is for the feed coming from the second laptop. So you can see that I have a composition that has 3 layers. I can adjust the contents of the layers, obviously, and the top 2 layers have alpha transparency. So if we have a look at the content, you can see down here that we've got some checkerboard action happening for that layer, and also for the other layer. Sorry, and for the cubes. So I've got these cubes from a little program I made in processing for lots of colors, and I've also got this other program that's got things, cubes floating out from space. So Resolume says that it's running at around 30 frames per second, and if I look at my CPU usage is about 50%. So recall that aside from doing the mixing, it's also running an NDI conversion to go to the network. So my Ethernet it's sending between 80 and 130 megabits per second. And if I go over to my receiving computer, this computer says that the output's running at around 60 frames per second, but as you can see there's a lot of delay. So the only inputs I have is a checkerboard and the NDI feed. So the NDI feed at 1080. This is an old laptop, it's maybe from like 2009 or something like that. And if we check the resource usage on this machine, you can see Resolume is running about 16%. So it's just using the native NDI source. And if we look at the performance, we can see our Ethernet is receiving, say, around like 100 to 150 megabits per second. So there's basically no disk usage because I'm not running any content from the local. And the CPU is about 20% total, so it's mostly from Resolume, as we can see here. So that does actually work, and unfortunately maybe the decoding of the buffer isn't working. So I guess we can test to see whether the NDI itself is a problem. So if we run the monitor for NDI and select the source is my Arena NDI out at 1920 by 1080. So you can see here that the refresh rate is much better than on the receiving laptop over the network. So obviously I don't think it's the network being the problem. I've got a gigabit Ethernet connection, so I think it's the decoding on that older laptop is struggling. So another thing I've done is I've mapped a key here to issue a freeze, so I can give the second laptop a chance to catch up on the video. So once it catches up, you can see that it's pretty accurate. So by eye, I can see on the right hand side, especially in these sorts of areas, that there's maybe some JPEG artifacts and it's not as clear and solid color. Let's just catch up a bit more and get some more graphic. So, yeah, Resolume logo, thank you. So, yeah, there is a little bit of a difference. One thing to note as well is that for some reason the primary laptop was not getting quite as clean a feed through the TV1 unit to the monitor. I don't know exactly why. So the output from the secondary computer through the TV1 unit to the monitor had very crisp output. Another thing is that for some reason from this main monitor, the TV1 unit wanted to lock the resolution as 1900 by 1200, even when the output was clearly set to 1920 by 1200, when I did everything I could to set it as 1920 by 1080 at 59.54 or whatever it is frames per second. So I was going to do a recording using my Atomis Ninja Assassin, but for some reason the feed going from this into the Assassin was either getting some sort of like rolling shutter type thing, or now it's just getting no input at all. So the best option I have is to look at it on the screen when it's frozen. I can like check to see exactly what the pixels look like. But yeah, so at the moment, this resolution, it's clearly not working well. What I can do is I'm actually simultaneously have activated 1080 and 720 things. So I've put a receiver here for 1080 and another receiver for 720. So once you change your NDI sync, the sender won't actually be sending anymore for the other one. So NDI is fairly efficient in that it only actually encodes and transmits data when you actually have a source and a sink. So you can see at the 720 frame rate, 720p option, that the refresh rate is heaps better. So if we have a look over here, we can see that this is the NDI viewer inside the computer. This view here is the HDMI out from the main computer, but through this processor. And on the right hand side is via NDI, the second computer out by HDMI into the TV1 unit and then to the screen. So if you can see where the flashes of the content from left to right are happening, that'll give you an idea of how much delay there is. So let's just sort of blank. So it's quite interesting to note that the NDI feed actually transmits with alpha channel. So you can see on the right hand side here, we can actually see the alpha that's come from this thing here. So the feed is actually, that's the Resolume checkerboard, and that's just a backdrop checkerboard thrown in there. So, I mean, it's interesting as an output, but it's clearly not ready for like audio syncs production. One thing I need to try is running it from a decent machine like this as the source, and also a decent receiver, and see if the latency is any better. Anyhow, that's all I got for now. So long for Subpixel. Bye. Just an addendum to the last test. What I've done is I've changed the source in here, still at this 720p NDI source, and I've just made it fill the screen. So the composition is still 1080, and now when we look at the output, we can see that the sync is a lot closer. So on the right hand side we have the NDI received and comped over this checkerboard, so we can see that the transparency has been passed. So if I freeze this, you're doing fairly well if you can spot where the join is once it's caught up with the freeze. So, I mean, you can see where the join is because the checkerboard is appearing, but yeah, so definitely some delay with regards to the timing, but a lot closer, and the smoothness of the output is good, and just the clarity of the feed is pretty good as well. So if we put in a little bit of beeple so we can like see something that people are used to seeing for the graphics. So I don't know, so maybe like reduce the brightness a bit. So it's interesting actually when you reduce the opacity of the lower layer, it does reveal that actually the entire composition is transparent. So if you don't actually have a base element, then if you're only using layers with alpha channel, then you can actually output a result with alpha channel, which is pretty cool. So here you can see the beeple clip with, it's because it's faded, you can still see the checkerboard that's done in the comp on the secondary computer. Pause. So I would say the quality on that is pretty damn good. As always, it's just a shame about the delay. However, even if you were using like a HDMI output from one machine and an HDMI capture on the other machine, you're still going to have a lag, and you're not going to have the benefit of alpha channel being transmitted. So this is actually a pretty good solution. Okay, so this time I've jigged it for a complete 720p workflow. I've got a 720p composition, and I've also got my outputs set to 720p. So I've got my HDMI output is display Watt 2, and that's also at 1280 by 720. And the NDI out that I'm using is the 720p NDI out. And the frame rate, it can get up to 45 frames per second or so. If you can get some focus on there, that'd be nice. So let's say 45, 50 frames per second. And this time I put some like vertically traveling lines so you can see the time delay a bit more clearly. So receiving machine with the NDI receives everything pretty nicely. This is still running at close to 60 frames per second. Though I guess if we look at the output that's gone through the DVI scaler, I can like stop it, and you can see that the image is still pretty good. So like the join now is probably a bit nicer because they're both outputs are 720p now instead of one of them being scaled. one yellow line. It's not a perfect match with the thing, but there could be some video scaling going on with the HDMI output going through the DVI scaler. So let's have a look at some nice Beeple content for you again. Some extra graphics on this one. So again, we can like make the first layer a bit transparent. You can see the checkerboard come through on the right hand side. Image quality between the left and right. The right hand side, I don't know if it's clear to see in the video here, but it's definitely jaggier, and you've got some little dark edges there, like this from the JPEG or whatever DCT based compression that's used by the NDI server. So yeah, that's a 720p test. You can see all the screens at once. You can see that it's not cheating. But yeah, the image quality is pretty good. I think it's going to be hard to beat over network connection. It's somewhat real time. Just one last note on the 720p test. I'd not realized before it was actually running this resolution for the scan converter was actually 1920 by 1080. I've now set it to 1280 by 720, and we can confirm that with the monitor information. .720p, 60 Hz. This is still beta software, so I haven't purchased the license yet. So this content of the light whip dancer here, this is actually high frame rate content. So if I was able to do a nice recording on the Ninja Assassin, I would have been able to check for like 60 frames per second content lag. So actually have a 60 frames per second. I had an idea to test the delay from end to end by putting 20 checkers from top to bottom of the image, and the line that's moving down the screen is BPM synced by Resolume at 120 BPM, and the position I've got is moving basically from the top to the bottom in 1 second. So each lock represents 5/100ths of a second, or 50 milliseconds. So if you pause the video or look at some screenshots, you should be able to figure out approximately what the delay is. So the delay is not just the NDI sending, but also it has to be processed by Resolume and then sent back out again. Let's try that again with some better camera resolution. So the line's moving down the screen basically once per second, and there's now 100 boxes from top to bottom, so each box represents 10 milliseconds. So, just a note about the bandwidth being used for 720p. The bandwidth is generally around 60 to 80 megabits per second, sorry. That's about 10 megabytes per second. And you can see the test with the lines.